In November of 2019, Dr. Elena Volkov, a 34-year-old glaciologist from the University of Colorado, disappeared from McMurdo Station, Antarctica. She'd told her research partner she was conducting routine ice core sampling 20 miles northeast of the base. When her snowmobile was found abandoned at the sampling site, its engine still warm, Elena had vanished into the most inhospitable landscape on Earth. 4 years later, a geological survey team found her alive in an unmapped ice cave, aged beyond recognition, and claiming she'd only been gone for hours. Elena Volkov moved through the world like someone perpetually solving equations in her head. Colleagues at McMurdo described her as intense but approachable, the kind of person who could explain continental drift over dinner and make it sound like poetry. She had thick, dark hair she kept pulled back with whatever was handy. A pen, a scrunchie, once memorably a piece of wire from a broken instrument, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. Elena saw patterns where other people saw chaos. Her research partner, Dr. James Chen, would later tell investigators she could look at an ice formation and read it like a book. Temperature changes, atmospheric conditions, even seismic activity, it was all there for her to interpret. But Chen noticed something different about Elena in the weeks before she disappeared. She'd become secretive about her work, spending long hours alone with data that should have been routine glacial measurements. When he asked about the readings she'd been collecting from the deep ice borings, her responses became evasive. She said she was seeing anomalies, Chen recalled. When I asked what kind, she just said, the kind that shouldn't exist. The Antarctic research season operates on rigid schedules and precise protocols. Every movement outside the station is logged, every piece of equipment tracked, every researcher accounted for. McMurdo Station in November buzzes with the controlled urgency of people racing against the coming winter darkness. The temperature hovers around -20 Fahrenheit, and the landscape stretches endless and white in every direction, a place where a wrong turn or equipment failure can mean death within hours. Elena had been part of the Antarctic research program for 6 seasons. She knew the protocols, understood the dangers, respected the continent's capacity to kill, which made her disappearance all the more inexplicable. On November 18th, Elena told Chen she was heading to Grid Point 7 Alpha, a sampling site they'd established the previous week. She planned to extract deep core samples and return before the weather window closed. Standard procedure called for a 2-person team, but Elena had made solo runs before. She was experienced, cautious, and the weather forecast showed clear conditions for the entire day. She seemed excited about something, Chen remembered. Not nervous, not secretive like she'd been. Excited, like she was about to prove a theory she'd been working on. Elena left McMurdo at 0800 hours on a Polaris snowmobile pulling a equipment sled. The station's communication logs show her checking in at 0930, confirming her arrival at the sampling site. At 11:45, she reported beginning the core extraction process. That was the last transmission anyone received from Dr. Elena Volkov. When she failed to check in at the scheduled 1400-hour mark, station personnel attempted radio contact. No response. By 1600, with weather conditions deteriorating and daylight fading, search and rescue launched. They found her snowmobile at Grid Point 7 Alpha exactly where it should have been. The engine was off but still warm. Her equipment lay scattered around an incomplete ice boring, core samples half extracted, instruments abandoned mid-process. Elena's emergency beacon sat silent on the machine's dashboard. Its green light blinking steadily, she had simply vanished. The search expanded through the night and into the following day. Helicopter overflights covered hundreds of square miles of ice. Ground teams followed every possible route she might have taken, searching for tracks, equipment, any sign of movement. The Antarctic wind erases footprints quickly, but experienced searchers know how to read the subtle signs that remain. The thing that bothered everyone was how abrupt it was, said Captain Michael Torres, who coordinated the search effort. Elena's equipment was arranged like she'd just stepped away for a minute. Her sample containers were labeled and organized. Whatever happened, it happened fast. But Elena Volkov had not simply wandered off and succumbed to exposure. The search teams found no tracks leading away from the site. No blood, no signs of struggle, no indication of equipment failure or medical emergency. It was as if she had been lifted from the ice and carried away by something that left no trace. The investigation that followed revealed details that complicated the simple narrative of a researcher lost to Antarctic conditions. Elena's research had been funded by a consortium of academic institutions and private corporations, all interested in her pioneering work on deep ice analysis and its implications for understanding climate change. But in the weeks before her disappearance, that research had taken an unexpected turn. Dr. Sarah Martinez, Elena's department head at the University of Colorado, noticed irregularities in Elena's data submissions during her final weeks at McMurdo. Instead of the routine glacial measurements expected from her grant, Elena had been filing reports about seismic anomalies, underground formations that didn't match known geological patterns. She was detecting structures, Martinez explained, large geometric structures deep beneath the ice sheet. When I asked her to clarify, she said she needed more time to verify her readings. She was convinced she'd found something significant. Elena's research notes, recovered from her quarters at McMurdo, showed increasingly detailed measurements of what she described as architectural anomalies in the deep ice. Her handwriting, normally precise, became hurried and excited in the final entries. One note, dated 3 days before her disappearance, read simply, "It's artificial, no question, but how old? And who's going to believe me?" The corporate sponsors of Elena's research became notably less cooperative after her disappearance. Minerva Geological Survey, a Canadian company with contracts throughout the Antarctic Peninsula, initially offered full support for the search effort. But when investigators requested access to Elena's geological data, the company cited proprietary concerns and referred all inquiries to their legal department. "Something shifted after Elena vanished," said Dr. Chen. "Suddenly, everyone was worried about data security and intellectual property. People who'd been collaborative for months became secretive overnight." The investigation uncovered another complicating factor. Elena's personal bank account had received 3 encrypted transfers totaling $47,000 in the 2 weeks before her disappearance. The transfers came from accounts traced to shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Financial investigators could track the money to Elena's account, but could not determine its source or purpose. When questioned about the payments, Elena's family expressed confusion. Her sister Maya, a software engineer in Denver, insisted Elena lived modestly and had never mentioned any outside income or consulting work. Elena was passionate about her research, but she wasn't motivated by money, Maya said. She drove a 12-year-old Honda and lived in the same apartment for 8 years. If someone was paying her nearly $50,000, it would have been for something she'd believed was important. Security footage from McMurdo Station, reviewed frame by frame during the investigation, revealed something that had initially been missed. At 07:53 hours on November 18th, 7 minutes before Elena's recorded departure time, the cameras captured her in conversation with an unidentified person near the equipment storage area. The individual's face was obscured by winter gear, but their body language suggested familiarity. This was not a chance encounter. The conversation lasted approximately 4 minutes. Elena appeared to be listening intently, occasionally nodding. At one point, she pulled out what looked like a map or document, which the other person examined before handing back. They parted with what the investigators described as a handshake or brief embrace, difficult to determine given the bulky clothing. Someone convinced Elena to change her plans that morning, Captain Torres concluded. The question is who and what they convinced her to do. Elena's research partner, Dr. James Chen, became a person of interest early in the investigation. As her closest collaborator, he would inherit primary control of her research grants and data if she was declared dead. Chen had been with the Antarctic program for 3 seasons, but his background check revealed financial pressures that investigators found concerning. Chen's ex-wife was pursuing aggressive alimony payments following their recent divorce. His condo in Boulder was 3 months behind on mortgage payments. The $340,000 research grant that Elena controlled would solve his immediate financial problems and secure his academic career for years to come. James knew Elena's work better than anyone, noted Detective Linda Hayes, who led the investigation from Colorado. He understood the value of her research and had the expertise to continue it. If Elena was going to disappear voluntarily or otherwise, James would benefit most directly. But Chen's alibi for November 18th appeared solid. Station logs showed him working in the main laboratory complex from 0730 to 1630 hours, with multiple witnesses confirming his presence throughout the day. Unless he had arranged for someone else to intercept Elena, his direct involvement seemed unlikely. The second suspect emerged from Elena's own notes. Dr. Marcus Webb, a geologist employed by Meridian Mining Corporation, had been conducting mineral surveys in the same region where Elena was working. Webb's company held exploratory permits for rare earth mineral extraction throughout the Antarctic Peninsula, permits that would be significantly more valuable if backed by Elena's geological data. Webb had approached Elena multiple times during the research season, offering collaboration opportunities and access to corporate resources. Elena had declined, citing the academic nature of her work and potential conflicts of interest. But her research notes indicated Webb had been persistent, eventually suggesting that Elena's discoveries could be worth millions if properly developed. Elena was suspicious of Webb's motives, Dr. Martinez recalled. She felt he was more interested in the commercial applications of her work than the scientific implications, but she also admitted he seemed to understand her research in ways that surprised her. Webb's movements on November 18th were harder to verify. Meridian's expedition was operating under separate permits and maintained their own communication protocols. The company initially reported Webb was conducting surveys 40 miles southeast of Elena's position, too far away to be directly involved in her disappearance. But subsequent investigation revealed discrepancies in Meridian's logs. GPS data from Webb's equipment, subpoenaed months later, showed gaps in coverage during the critical time period. Either his tracking devices had malfunctioned, or someone had deliberately disabled them. The third person of interest had the most access and the most to lose. Commander Patricia Hawkins, the National Science Foundation liaison responsible for coordinating civilian research with military logistics at McMurdo Station. Hawkins had top-secret clearance and was privy to classified aspects of Antarctic research that most scientists never saw. Elena's research had been flagged by multiple government agencies as potentially sensitive. The seismic anomalies she detected were in regions that overlapped with classified military installations and strategic resource surveys. If Elena had stumbled onto something that compromised national security interests, Hawkins would have been the person tasked with managing the situation. Commander Hawkins was under pressure from multiple directions, a source within the NSF later revealed. Elena's discoveries were creating complications at levels way above a research station commander's pay grade. There were questions about whether Elena's work should continue, or if it needed to be redirected. Hawkins had been the person to approve Elena's solo expedition on November 18th, a decision that violated several safety protocols. When questioned about this approval, Hawkins cited Elena's experience and the routine nature of the sampling work. But other researchers noted that Hawkins had been increasingly restrictive about solo operations in the weeks prior to Elena's disappearance. Patricia was acting strangely in those final weeks, remembered Dr. Chen. She was asking detailed questions about Elena's research schedule, her routes, her sampling locations. At the time, we assumed it was just normal oversight. In retrospect, it felt like surveillance. The investigation continued through the Antarctic winter, when conditions made further field searches impossible. Elena Volkov was officially classified as missing, presumed dead. Her research grants were transferred to Dr. Chen, her data was sealed pending resolution of the case, and McMurdo Station returned to its normal operations. But Elena's family refused to accept the official conclusions. Maya Volkov hired private investigators and maintained pressure on law enforcement to continue pursuing leads. She established a website dedicated to her sister's case, collecting tips and theories from around the world. Elena was too smart and too careful to just vanish, Maya insisted. Someone took her, or someone convinced her to go somewhere she shouldn't have gone. Either way, she didn't choose to disappear into the ice. The case generated significant media attention, particularly within the scientific community. Elena's research had been groundbreaking, and her disappearance raised uncomfortable questions about the safety and oversight of Antarctic research operations. Several academic journals published retrospective analyses of her work, trying to piece together what she might have discovered in those final weeks. Dr. Robert Kellner, a geophysicist at MIT who had collaborated with Elena on previous projects, spent months analyzing her data and field notes. His conclusions were unsettling. Elena had been mapping something large and artificial beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, something that showed evidence of geometric precision impossible in natural formations. Elena's seismic readings suggested a structure approximately 2 miles long and half a mile wide, buried under nearly a mile of ice, Kellner reported. The acoustic signatures were consistent with manufactured materials, metal, concrete, possibly composite structures, but the ice cores indicated this formation had been buried for thousands of years. Kellner's analysis raised more questions than it answered. If Elena had discovered evidence of ancient artificial structures beneath Antarctica, who else knew about it? And how far would various parties go to control access to such a discovery? The breakthrough in Elena Volkov's case came not through investigation, but through accident. On March 15, 2023, a geological survey team from the Norwegian Antarctic Research Institute was conducting ground-penetrating radar surveys 60 miles northeast of McMurdo Station. The team, led by Dr. Erik Solheim, was mapping subsurface ice formations as part of a long-term climate study. At 13:47 hours, their radar equipment detected an anomalous void approximately 30 meters below the surface, a cavity large enough to potentially house equipment or shelter. Such formations are rare but not unknown in Antarctic ice sheets. The team marked the location for future investigation and continued their survey. But 20 minutes later, graduate student Astrid Kellner, Dr. Robert Kellner's daughter, who had volunteered for the expedition partly out of curiosity about Elena Volkov's research, noticed something troubling in the radar returns. The void wasn't natural. The edges were too regular, the dimensions too precise. "I'd been studying my father's analysis of Dr. Volkov's work," Astrid later explained. "The signature we were seeing matched descriptions from her notes almost exactly. We'd found one of the formations she'd been tracking." Dr. Solheim initially resisted investigating the void. His team's mission was surface mapping, not cave exploration, and deviating from approved research protocols could jeopardize their permits. But Astrid's persistence and the potential connection to Elena Volkov eventually convinced him to at least examine the site more closely. The void entrance was hidden beneath a snow bridge that had likely formed over decades of accumulation, but recent warming had weakened the formation, creating a gap barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. When Solheim dropped a weighted line through the opening, it fell 27 meters before hitting solid ground. "We could hear the line bouncing," Solheim remembered, but there was something else. An echo that suggested the space was much larger than our equipment indicated. It sounded like a cavern. Against his better judgment, Solheim authorized a preliminary descent. Team member Hans Eriksson, an experienced cave researcher, rappelled into the void with full safety equipment and communication gear. What he found defied every assumption about Antarctic geology. The cavity was not a natural ice cave. It was a precisely carved chamber extending hundreds of meters in multiple directions, with walls that showed clear evidence of tool marks. The ice itself appeared different, denser, clearer, with a faint luminescence that seemed to come from within. But most shocking was what Eriksson discovered in the deepest section of the cave system. Dr. Elena Volkov was alive. She was severely dehydrated and disoriented, her clothing torn and dirty, her hair grown long and streaked with white. When Eriksson's headlamp illuminated her figure huddled against the cave wall, she looked up with eyes that seemed to have aged decades beyond her 34 years. "Please," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I need to finish the calculations. They're almost complete." The cave walls around Elena were covered in mathematical equations, complex formulas carved directly into the ice with what appeared to be some kind of heated tool. The equations dealt with subjects ranging from quantum mechanics to geological engineering, some written in notation systems that the rescue team didn't recognize. Elena insisted she had no memory of writing the equations. "I was sampling ice," she told her rescuers, her voice growing stronger as they provided her with water and emergency nutrients. "I found this place by accident. There was something down here, something important. I was only going to look for a few hours." When Dr. Solheim informed Elena that she had been missing for 4 years, she became agitated and confused. According to her perception, she had been in the cave for less than a day. Her watch, still running, showed a date in November 2019. Her body, however, told a different story. Medical examination would later reveal that Elena had aged approximately 15 years during her disappearance. Her hair showed growth consistent with 4 years of time. Her muscle mass indicated prolonged malnutrition, and her bones showed calcium loss typical of extended isolation. Most disturbing, her cellular structure displayed markers associated with extreme temporal stress, as if her body had experienced time differently than her consciousness. But Elena's physical condition was only the beginning of the mystery. Her backpack, found near where she'd been huddled, contained research journals filled with observations and measurements she claimed no memory of making. The journals documented geological anomalies throughout the cave system, including detailed maps of passages that extended far beyond what the rescue team had explored. Most unsettling were Elena's repeated references to the structure and the engineers. Her notes described finding evidence of ancient construction deep within the cave system. Manufactured materials that seemed to predate human civilization, embedded in ice formations that geological dating suggested were thousands of years old. "Someone built this place," Elena had written in an entry dated 6 months after her official disappearance. "The ice preserved everything. But preserved it from what? And why does the mathematics keep changing when I'm not looking?" The rescue of Elena Volkov created immediate complications for multiple parties. The Norwegian research team was operating under permits that didn't authorize human rescue operations or criminal investigation. Elena's discovery raised questions about territorial claims, research protocols, and the security implications of whatever she had found in the cave system. Within hours of Elena's rescue, representatives from the United States Antarctic Program, the National Science Foundation, and several government agencies that Dr. Solheim couldn't identify had arrived at the site. Elena was evacuated to Christchurch, New Zealand for medical evaluation while the cave system was sealed and declared a restricted research area. "They told us it was for Elena's protection and scientific integrity," Dr. Solheim later said, "but it felt more like a cover-up. We'd found something significant, and suddenly it was too sensitive for the people who'd actually found it." Elena's medical evaluation revealed physical anomalies that doctors struggled to explain. Beyond the accelerated aging and temporal displacement, her neurological scans showed unusual activity in regions associated with mathematical processing and spatial reasoning. It was as if her brain had been enhanced or altered during her time in the cave. Elena's cognitive abilities had changed, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the neurologist who examined her in Christchurch. She could perform complex calculations in her head that would normally require computer assistance. She had developed almost supernatural spatial awareness, but she also showed signs of severe psychological trauma and memory fragmentation. Elena claimed no memory of most of her time in the cave. She remembered finding the entrance while following unusual seismic readings, rappelling down to investigate, and discovering evidence of artificial construction. But between those initial discoveries and being found by the Norwegian team, her memories were fragmentary and contradictory. She remembered writing in her research journals, and the doctor, Walsh noted, but when shown the journals, she couldn't explain the content. She remembered feeling compelled to solve mathematical problems, but couldn't recall what the problems were or why they seemed important. Most disturbing were Elena's memories of not being alone in the cave system. "Someone else was there," Elena told investigators during her first formal interview. "Someone who understood the mathematics better than I did. They would show me problems to solve, corrections to make, but I can't remember their face, their voice, anything specific. It's like trying to remember a dream." When pressed for details, Elena became agitated and confused. She insisted someone had been teaching her, guiding her research, helping her understand the significance of what she'd found. but she could provide no concrete description of this person or any evidence of their presence. Elena's memories have the quality of induced recall, Doctor, Walsh explained, like someone had been systematically conditioning her responses over an extended period, but conditioning her for what purpose and using what methods remains unclear. The investigation into Elena's disappearance reopened with new urgency and new complications. Her survival eliminated the possibility of accidental death, but raised questions about who had known about the cave system and why they had directed Elena there. The unidentified person captured on McMurdo Station security footage suddenly became the key to understanding what had happened. Someone had known about the cave, known about its unusual properties, and deliberately guided Elena to it. Whether they intended for her to survive or simply wanted her research data was still unclear. Dr. James Chen, Dr. Marcus Webb, and Commander Patricia Hawkins all faced renewed scrutiny. Each had means, motive, and opportunity to manipulate Elena's research schedule. But Elena's 4-year survival suggested something more complex than simple murder or corporate espionage. Someone wanted Elena in that cave for an extended period, Detective Hayes concluded, but they also wanted her work to continue. The question is whether they expected her to survive, or if her survival was an unexpected complication. The mathematics carved into the cave walls became a separate investigation in itself. Dr. Robert Kellner, working with a team of specialists from multiple disciplines, attempted to decode the equations Elena claimed she hadn't written. The formulas dealt with subjects ranging from quantum mechanics to geological engineering, but they were connected by underlying principles that conventional science couldn't explain. Some equations appeared to describe methods for manipulating spacetime on a localized level, theoretical physics that wouldn't be possible with current technology. Elena's equations suggest someone has solved problems that our best physicists consider impossible, Dr. Kellner reported. Either she developed capabilities far beyond her known expertise during her isolation, or someone else was directing her work. Most intriguingly, several of the equation sequences remained incomplete. It appeared Elena had been working towards some larger solution, some final calculation that would tie together all the disparate mathematical threads, but her rescue had interrupted the process. Elena's return to consciousness in the outside world proved as disorienting as her missing years. During her medical evaluation in Christchurch, she experienced what doctors described as temporal vertigo, moments where she seemed to lose track of time completely, staring at walls for hours or becoming agitated when told only minutes had passed. She kept asking about the equations, Doctor, Walsh observed. Not consciously, she'd wake up from sleep talking about incomplete calculations, about needing to return to finish the work. It was as if some part of her was still in that cave, still working on problems she couldn't consciously remember. Elena's sister Maya flew to New Zealand immediately after learning of the rescue. Their reunion was emotionally complex. Maya grieved for the 4 years lost while Elena struggled to understand that time had passed at all. She looked at me like I'd aged overnight, Maya recalled. She kept apologizing for being late, for not calling. She couldn't process that I'd thought she was dead. To her, she'd just stepped away from her work for a few hours and everyone had overreacted. But Elena's journals from the cave told a different story. The entries, written in her handwriting but containing knowledge and observations that seemed beyond her expertise, documented a systematic exploration of the cave system and its contents over what appeared to be months or years of careful work. The journals described finding manufactured artifacts embedded in ice formations that geological analysis suggested were over 10,000 years old. Elena had documented symbols and markings that resembled no known human language, architectural features that defied conventional understanding of ancient construction techniques, and mathematical principles that shouldn't have been possible given the presumed age of the materials. Elena's notes describe a preservation system that maintained artificial structures in perfect condition for millennia, reported Dr. Kellner. But the technology required for such preservation doesn't exist today, let alone thousands of years ago. Either Elena was hallucinating, or she found evidence of capabilities that challenge our understanding of human history. The most detailed journal entries focused on what Elena called the calculation chamber, a section of the cave system where the walls were covered in mathematical notations that she claimed were already there when she arrived. According to her notes, she had spent months trying to decode and complete these calculations, driven by an inexplicable compulsion to solve what appeared to be an incomplete equation of staggering complexity. "The mathematics is calling for completion," Elena had written in one entry. "I understand pieces, temporal mechanics, geological resonance, something about consciousness and quantum states, but the final variables elude me. Someone started this work, someone who understood things we've forgotten." Elena's description of the calculation chamber matched the location where the Norwegian rescue team had found her, surrounded by equations carved into the ice. But Elena insisted she had no memory of creating those carvings. According to her recollection, the walls had been blank when she arrived, and the mathematical work she'd documented in her journals had been purely theoretical. The contradictions between Elena's memories, her journals, and the physical evidence created a puzzle that investigators struggled to resolve. Either Elena's isolation had caused severe psychological fragmentation, or something in the cave had systematically altered her perception and memory of events. Dr. Marcus Webb, the geologist from Meridian Mining Corporation, emerged as the most likely candidate for having orchestrated Elena's disappearance. Financial records subpoenaed during the renewed investigation revealed that Webb's company had been conducting unauthorized surveys in the cave system area for over 2 years before Elena's vanishing. Meridian's permits covered mineral exploration, but their actual activities involved extensive ground-penetrating radar surveys and illegal drilling operations designed to map subsurface anomalies. The company had identified the cave system months before Elena's official discovery, but had been unable to access it safely due to the unstable ice formations above the entrance. Webb needed someone with Elena's expertise to explore the cave system properly, Detective Hayes determined. Her background in glaciology and geological dating made her the ideal person to document whatever Meridian had found, but rather than approach her directly, they manipulated her research to lead her there. The encrypted payments to Elena's bank account were traced through shell companies back to Meridian Mining Corporation, but the money appeared to be payment for work that Elena had no conscious memory of performing. Detailed geological surveys and artifact documentation that Meridian claimed Elena had provided over a period of several months. Elena was being paid to do work she doesn't remember doing, explained FBI financial crimes investigator David Chen. Either she was maintaining deliberate secrecy about a consulting arrangement, or someone was using her identity to conduct research she was unaware of. Elena's rescue had interrupted what appeared to be a long-term operation to exploit her expertise and discoveries, but it also revealed the scope of what she had found, evidence of technological capabilities that various parties were willing to kill for. Commander Patricia Hawkins became the focus of renewed investigation when classified documents obtained through court order revealed that the National Science Foundation had been monitoring Elena's research activities far more closely than initially disclosed. Hawkins had been filing detailed reports about Elena's work to parties within the military and intelligence communities, tracking her discoveries and assessing their strategic implications. Elena's research had been classified as potentially relevant to national security before she even arrived in Antarctica, revealed NSF whistleblower Dr. Catherine Price. Commander Hawkins wasn't just overseeing her work, she was managing it on behalf of agencies that viewed Elena's discoveries as strategic assets. The classified documents indicated that multiple government agencies had been aware of subsurface anomalies in the Antarctic Peninsula for decades. Elena's legitimate research had inadvertently intersected with long-running classified investigations into what intelligence analysts described as archaeological anomalies of strategic significance. Elena's disappearance appeared to have been orchestrated not just by corporate interests seeking to exploit her discoveries, but by government agencies attempting to control access to information that could have profound implications for understanding human history and technological development. But Elena's 4-year survival in the cave system created complications that no party had anticipated. Instead of simply disappearing with her knowledge, she had continued working, advancing the understanding of what she'd found in ways that may have fundamentally changed the strategic equations. The mathematical work Elena couldn't remember completing suggested she had solved theoretical problems that conventional science considered impossible. If her calculations were correct, they described methods for manipulating fundamental physical properties on a localized scale. Technological capabilities that would revolutionize everything from energy production to space exploration. Elena's equations, if they could be implemented, would represent the greatest technological breakthrough in human history, Dr. Kellner explained. But implementing them would require understanding the theoretical framework she developed during her missing years, knowledge she claims she doesn't possess. The investigation reached its climax when analysis of Elena's research journals revealed coded coordinates leading to additional cache sites throughout the Antarctic Peninsula. Elena had apparently documented multiple locations containing similar artifacts and construction, creating a map of discoveries that suggested the cave system was part of a much larger complex. Elena wasn't just exploring one cave or Nurimawas, Dr. Solheim realized. She was mapping an entire network of connected sites, each containing different pieces of the same technological puzzle. Her 4 years weren't spent in isolation. They were spent conducting the most significant archaeological investigation in human history. But Elena's conscious memory contained no recollection of the broader investigation her journals documented. She remembered only fragments: the initial discovery, the compulsion to solve mathematical problems, the sense that someone was guiding her work. The systematic exploration and documentation that her journals recorded remained completely absent from her conscious recall. Dr. Jennifer Walsh concluded that Elena's memory fragmentation was not the result of psychological trauma, but of systematic conditioning designed to compartmentalize her knowledge and prevent her from understanding the full scope of what she had discovered. Someone wanted Elena to do the work, but not retain conscious access to the results, Dr. Walsh determined. Her memory gaps are too precise, too specific to be natural. She was being used as a research tool by parties who needed her expertise but couldn't risk her understanding the implications of what she was finding. The revelation that Elena had been subjected to some form of advanced psychological conditioning raised questions about who possessed such capabilities and how they had been applied in the cave environment. The technology required for such precise memory manipulation didn't officially exist, but Elena's condition suggested it had been deployed with sophisticated effectiveness. 3 months after Elena's rescue, a joint expedition involving Norwegian, American, and international researchers returned to investigate the cave system more thoroughly. What they found exceeded even Elena's documented discoveries. The cave complex extended for over 15 miles through the Antarctic ice, containing multiple chambers filled with preserved artifacts and construction that appeared to represent a technological civilization of unknown origin. The mathematical notations Elena had worked to complete were found carved into walls throughout the system, suggesting a long-term project involving multiple participants over an extended period. Most significantly, the expedition discovered evidence of recent habitation in areas of the cave system that Elena's journals had not documented. Someone had been living and working in the deeper chambers, maintaining equipment and facilities that showed signs of continuous occupation. Elena wasn't alone in that cave system, reported expedition leader Dr. Sarah Martinez. Someone else had been there for years, possibly decades. They'd created living spaces, work areas, even primitive manufacturing facilities. Elena had been brought there to work on a project that was already well underway. The discovery of the hidden habitation areas suggested that Elena's disappearance was part of a much larger operation involving multiple participants and resources, but the identity of the other occupants remained mysterious. They had abandoned their facilities sometime before the expedition arrived, leaving behind only equipment and workspaces that provided few clues about who they were or what they had been trying to accomplish. Elena's attempts to remember her missing years intensified as evidence mounted of the work she had performed. Under supervised medical hypnosis, she began recovering fragmentary memories of interactions with individuals she could not identify, of being taught mathematical concepts she had never studied, of working on problems whose purpose remained unclear even in her recovered memories. "They knew I would forget," Elena said during one hypnosis session. "That was part of the plan. I was supposed to do the work, advance their project, but not retain the knowledge. They needed my expertise, but not my awareness. Elena's hypnotic recollections described individuals who seemed to possess advanced knowledge of mathematics, physics, and engineering, but who were themselves working to understand technology and artifacts they had not created. She had been brought into an existing investigation, used to solve specific problems, then psychologically conditioned to forget her contributions. Elena was essentially kidnapped and forced to work on a project she was never supposed to remember, Dr. Walsh concluded. But the conditioning wasn't perfect. Her conscious mind forgot, but her subconscious retained fragments. That's why she kept trying to return to the cave. Part of her knew there was unfinished work. The mathematical equations Elena had completed but couldn't remember represented solutions to problems in theoretical physics that conventional science was decades away from solving. Her work had apparently advanced understanding of space-time manipulation, consciousness transfer, and technological applications that bordered on what most people would consider impossible. But implementing Elena's solutions would require understanding the theoretical framework she had developed during her missing years, knowledge that remained locked in psychological conditioning that medical science couldn't safely reverse. The case of Elena Volkov officially closed 6 months after her rescue, with conclusions that satisfied no one involved. The government agencies classified most of the evidence and restricted access to the cave system indefinitely. Meridian Mining Corporation settled out of court for undisclosed amounts, neither admitting nor denying their involvement in Elena's disappearance. Elena returned to Colorado but never resumed her academic career. The psychological effects of her missing years made it impossible for her to conduct normal research or maintain the focus required for scientific work. She lived quietly, supported by her sister and the settlement money from the various legal actions, but Elena continued working on mathematics. In a small apartment in Denver, she filled notebooks with calculations she claimed came to her in dreams, complex equations that expanded on the work she couldn't consciously remember completing. The mathematical work was beyond her known expertise, dealing with concepts she insisted she had never studied, but the calculations were consistently valid and increasingly sophisticated. Elena is still solving problems she doesn't understand, Dr. Walsh observed during follow-up evaluations. Whatever conditioning she experienced created pathways in her mind that remain active. She's continuing research she has no conscious memory of beginning. Elena's sister Maya documented her ongoing work, photographing the mathematical notebooks and consulting with experts who confirmed that Elena was producing revolutionary theoretical physics despite having no conscious understanding of the concepts involved. Elena is essentially serving as a conduit for knowledge she doesn't possess, explained Dr. Kellner. She's completing calculations that represent breakthrough discoveries in theoretical physics, but she can't explain what the calculations mean or how she knows they're correct. 2 years after her rescue, Elena completed what appeared to be the final sequence in the mathematical framework she had been developing. The calculations filled 17 notebooks and described a coherent theoretical system for manipulating fundamental physical properties through controlled quantum interactions. 3 days after finishing the final calculations, Elena Volkov disappeared again. Her apartment showed no signs of struggle or forced entry. Her personal belongings remained undisturbed. But Elena and all 17 notebooks containing her mathematical work were gone, leaving only a note in her precise handwriting. The work is complete. Time to return it to where it belongs. Maya Volkov contacted authorities immediately, but the investigation yielded no leads. Elena had simply walked out of her apartment and vanished as completely as she had in Antarctica. Security cameras in her building showed her leaving alone at 3:17 a.m. carrying a single backpack. She walked out of frame and was never seen again. The investigation into Elena's second disappearance was brief and inconclusive. With no evidence of foul play and Elena's history of psychological conditioning, authorities classified her as a voluntary missing person. The case was closed with the assumption that Elena's damaged psyche had led her to another breakdown. But Maya Volkov knew her sister better than the investigators did. Elena's final disappearance wasn't a psychological collapse, it was a completion. The mathematical work Elena had been conditioned to perform was finished, and she had been summoned to deliver it to whatever parties had orchestrated her initial disappearance. Elena didn't have a breakdown, Maya insisted. She was called back. Whatever they needed her to accomplish, she finished it. Now she's gone again, but this time by choice. The official records classify Elena Volkov as missing, presumed dead, lost twice to the same mysterious circumstances that had already claimed 4 years of her life. Her mathematical work disappeared with her, leaving no trace of the revolutionary discoveries she had been psychologically conditioned to develop and then forget. But in a storage unit in Denver, Maya Volkov maintains copies of every page Elena produced during her 2 years of unconscious research. The mathematical notebooks represent breakthrough discoveries in theoretical physics, solutions to problems that conventional science won't solve for decades. Maya doesn't understand the mathematics, but she understands what they represent. Evidence that her sister was used as an unwitting instrument in a project whose scope and purpose remain hidden from public knowledge. Elena's mind had been temporarily borrowed to solve problems beyond human understanding, then returned damaged and incomplete when the work was done. The cave system in Antarctica remains sealed and classified, its contents and significance known only to parties who view such knowledge as too dangerous for public awareness. Elena Volkov's name appears in no official records of the discoveries made there, her contributions to advancing human understanding relegated to classified files that may never see public release. But on clear nights in Denver, Maya Volkov sometimes receives text messages from numbers that don't exist, containing single lines of mathematical notation in her sister's precise handwriting. The messages suggest Elena is still working, still solving problems she doesn't understand, still serving as a conduit for knowledge that humanity isn't ready to possess. The messages never contain enough information to complete any calculation, just fragments that hint at work continuing somewhere beyond conventional investigation. Maya photographs each message before it automatically deletes, collecting pieces of evidence that her sister remains alive, remains valuable to whatever forces orchestrated her disappearances. Elena Volkov vanished into the Antarctic ice in November of 2019, was found 4 years later aged beyond recognition, then vanished again after completing mathematical work that could revolutionize human understanding of physical reality. Her story raises questions about how much we truly know about our own planet, about what discoveries have been made and hidden, about what capabilities exist beyond public knowledge. In the end, Elena's case demonstrates the fragility of individual consciousness against forces that view human expertise as a resource to be exploited and discarded. She was brilliant enough to make breakthrough discoveries, but not powerful enough to retain control over her own knowledge or memory. The Antarctic ice keeps its secrets, as it always has. But somewhere in the white silence, work continues on problems that conventional science doesn't know how to ask, solved by minds that won't remember the solutions, advancing human capability in ways that will never be publicly acknowledged. Elena Volkov disappeared twice into mysteries that dwarf individual understanding. Whether she vanished into natural forces or artificial ones, whether her work advanced human knowledge or served other purposes remains hidden beneath layers of classification and conditioning that may never be fully penetrated. But the mathematics remains, fragments of revolutionary discovery scattered across time and memory, waiting to be reassembled by whoever has the capability and authority to implement solutions that could transform. Her disappearances mark not just personal tragedy, but the boundaries of what individual consciousness can retain when it encounters knowledge too significant for individual control. Somewhere in the silence, the work continues.